I'm really glad that you guys decided to do this.
Thank you.
I think I love the idea of Google as a gathering place for these kinds of conversations. And I think the rougher and tougher and more aggressive the arguments are, the better we can move the whole thing forward. I'm really convinced that we at Google benefit when you guys are successful, right? And I learned this a long time ago, that when the network gets stronger, we win and our competitors win and everybody wins, right? And that's sort of a new fact for a lot of people, but it's very much, I think, the way we operate. Anyway, so thank you for doing this.
No, thank you. I mean, and thanks for everyone for coming and being part of this. It's a profound point you make. And I want to kind of roll back the clock because I've been hearing you talk about this for some time. When you joined Google, you were recruited in to be the CEO. You'd been the CEO of Novell. You'd been the CTO of Sun Microsystems. You'd had this amazing career. You come into Google, quite literally, John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins recruits you, and literally the job description is provide adult supervision. And you come in, and you've got Larry and Sergey who are certainly brilliant, but doing all kinds of crazy things. You've got engineers who don't want to listen to anybody. And anything that smacks of management, people kind of recoil against. So in a way, there was autonomy and some sense of vision, as we just talked about, and absolute chaos. So how do you come into that and mold it and shape it and build it?
I think it helps to have some humility and have teenage daughters. And so I sort of viewed the young people that I met at Google as sort of similar to my daughters, which is that they don't listen to me, but every once in a while you hear that if you say something to them, eventually it comes out of them as their own idea, right? And that was sort of roughly how I approached it. And I did not appreciate, there were so many things I didn't understand. I didn't understand how good the model was. I didn't understand how successful the advertising would work. I didn't understand that there would be different ways of doing management, right? Because I had been trained in the classic, in the tech industry, it dated from Data General and DEC, where you had a very specific kind of engineering management. You had certain sort of plans and programs and so forth. And we had none of that. Wayne Rosing, who was the first engineering VP, used to say, it's like the Borg, it just moves forward. And I remember the first staff meeting I went to, it was a fascinating staff meeting because the conversations were fascinating. They were very interesting. It was like being in graduate school. But of course, it just went on and on and on. And so the trick is to maintain that level of curiosity and intellectual discipline, but put enough structure that stuff happens, right? And that is ultimately what we were able to do with a lot of work, including help from you. But I think it's best to understand that the programming of the culture predated me, and what sort of legitimate management needed to do was to harness it in a good way. And the book is indeed about a lot of this. So for example, everyone's arrogant, right? Especially in a company like Google. Which arrogant people do you keep? Well, you keep the arrogant people who are self-confident, lead teams, they're driven, they're change agents, they have a lot of passion. You don't keep the ones who also are liars, self-deceivers, that kind of stuff. So it makes sense once you say it that way, right?
But I'm trying to, I want to sort of get as well to something. I'm thinking of people who are at other organizations which don't have that same DNA that sort of Google started with.
But I have a strong opinion. Since I have the perfect audience for my message, bear with me. Everything we talk about in our book and we talk about at Google, you can do. And do you know how you do it? What percentage of your workforce do you turn over and hire in a given year? 5%? 10%? It's numbers like that, okay? So you could literally today, tomorrow, change your hiring practices to consistent with Laszlo's new book, which you're late on.
Again, no hierarchy, no pressure. We're all love and hugs and kisses at Google.
Yeah, all that shit. But my point is that you could set yourself out to remake the culture of your company, and over a few years, right, with the support of the CEO, the board, or whatever, you could actually do this. And here's what you got to do. You got to set a 5-year plan and strategy that people like, and it's got to make sense. You've got to evangelize it really strong. You've got to tighten up your hiring and look for the kind of people that will drive you forward. And then there'll be an internal revolution, right? But that's fun. That's business. If somehow you thought that business was stable, predictable, hierarchical, that's a government. okay? They don't pay so well, and a long list of other problems in government. Business is naturally creative. It's called creative destruction, right? Schumpeter, all of that kind of stuff. And I used to think, why does it keep changing and why am I always behind as I sort of did other jobs? And why am I always screwing up? And the answer is, it's always changing. And what we say in the book, and I'll say here, is it's going to change much faster in each and every one of your businesses. And the reason is because the internet has unleashed a whole bunch of competitive forces that you can't control. And Google can't either. I mean, it's just, we're doing it all to ourselves.
Yeah. Well, when you think about, though, so you have this 5-year plan. Let's say somebody comes up with a plan and they want to push forward and they're going to meet resistance.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you one more
Please,
time?
of course.
By the way, you know, the Russians had 5-year plans. I'm not talking about those kinds of 5-year plans.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a 5-year plan that anticipates the competitive and technological changes that will affect your business with good and reasonable responses to them. Okay, and it's easy to give you examples. BlackBerry RIM, right? The competitors to the Intel chipset, right? Sun Microsystems, where I worked. Novell, where I worked, right? 20 years ago, just telling stories, I sat with the then CEO, Scott McNealy, and the president, Owen Brown, and Wayne and I and a CFO did an analysis that we should be in the PC industry. And the CFO, very smart guy, said, we can't get our cost structure low enough to compete in that market. Now, it took 15 years for that to become clear to the shareholders, and ultimately the company was sold. Right? So you could have a good time for 14 years. But had we acted on that sentence, and I was too dumb to sit there and say, stop, you know, I didn't know how to ask the question. So I vowed never to make that mistake at Google, so we started with the price of free. I mean, we can go down further. Okay.
Well, so Lord Acton wrote that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts. And absolutely. And he talked about how once you're in a position of authority, you're tempted to sort of be more autocratic, to hold yourself to a different standard than that.
That is my plan.
It's not your plan. I've seen your plan. It's not your plan. If people do what we've been talking about, where you give employees freedom and you treat them right and you give them a voice in how things are run. We heard from Zingerman's earlier today, a grocery chain in Michigan, where they have it's a partnership, grocery store partnership, and people want more and more freedom. And yet, as an executive, and our guests here are by and large many of them executives. It's kind of annoying when people are asking all these questions, and I know at Google we have this tradition of the all hands and TGIF, and they're not always the most polite, civil questions. Like how do you hew to these values of sort of transparency and involvement, engagement, when you've got like people who are rude and obnoxious?
Well, first place, I think the human condition includes entitled, rude, arrogant people, and we understand that. Some of them you keep, some of them you get tired of, and remember, you can work with people who are not your friends. Right, if you respect them, you treat them well, you can often produce great success for both. So I think there's a bunch of things I would say to that. The first is you've got to establish a culture of trust and transparency. If there's something fundamentally wrong with your position as a business, let me use the tobacco companies lying about smoking and cancer, it's very difficult to communicate truthfully inside of the company when the employees know you're lying to them. Right, it's just people have a bullshit detector. Right, so you have to be careful that what you say, like Google says, we put the user first. So if we ever don't do that, our employees are very aggressive, and as they should be, right? So part of that is that sort of shared trust between executives and management, and that's solved by communication. And people, by the way, want to be led. They want to win. They want to see the low performers not promoted. They want to see the high. There's a whole bunch of things which you all take for granted that they want to see done. But ultimately, communication is a start. The second is that it is true that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I think all forms of human governance need a check and balance. And I think you can see this in dictatorships around the world. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter too much what the human structure is, as long as there's an independent verifier. In other words, you can do whatever kind of country you want as long as you have an independent Supreme Court with a real constitution that really has the power to sort of keep people in check, deal with corruption, and so forth and so on. That's sort of my personal view. So, you'll see a lot of executives on power trips. And ultimately, I think the best executives are people who understand that they work through others, right? And a simple test is, do they say I a lot? Do they ever emerge from their corporate office? When they run meetings, another example. When you run a meeting, do you do all the talking or do the employees do all the talking? It better be the latter. The less you say, the more they say, the better. Another thing is, if you think about a meeting that you're in, and all of you spend all your time in meetings because you're senior executives, out of the 10 people you normally meet with, 3 talk a lot, 3 never say a word, and 2 are sort of annoying, right? It's okay, right? So one day, why don't you see if you can make the people who never say anything say something interesting, and get a real debate on a real issue, and see if you can find the best idea, not the consensus idea and not your idea. So those are some simple rules.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Any questions? I've got some more, but I want to give a heads up in case anybody wants to ask Eric questions.
Yes,
go ahead.
Oh my God.
So the question...
Entitlement? I see Chris DeBona here. Do we have a problem, Chris? If you and I had this conversation, everyone is just as a kumbaya place, right?
So the question was, do we have a problem with entitlement?
How do you deal with it?
Oh my God, you think we're successful? Maybe you have some advice.
I could learn something from you.
Next question.
There's something about, well, all I can tell you is I spend most of my time not here because I deal with external issues. And when I come back here and I look at the sunshine and the sort of smart people and so forth, and people start bitching me, I say, like, do you have any clue what goes on in the rest of the world? I mean, do you literally understand the suffering that the average employee goes through? So I think there's a couple of things you can do. One is that you can often you're better off in a challenge to somebody to use humor, right? Basically, if you're in a situation where you say, I can't stand you, you're an idiot, you're so arrogant, get out of my face, you're losing, right? And I'm sure you wouldn't do that anyway. You're transferring power from you to them. You're giving them your emotional control. So sort of a good human rule. So you're much better off using humor and fun and so forth to sort of bound them. You'll never really confuse the arrogance. What I like with engineers who are highly arrogant, and we like highly arrogant engineers because it takes that kind of ego, is they'll come up and they say, well, what do you think? And I say, well, actually, I think it's fine, but my opinion doesn't matter. And they go, why? I said, because I'm not the judge of your success. Your customers are, and I'm going to measure the hell out of it. That freaks them out. So sometimes the way you do this is you say, appeal to a higher power, right? Hey, big shot, I'm with you. You know, you're God's gift to humanity. You're going to get judged. And not by me, but I'm watching. Say it in a nicer way than I just said.
I feel like all my performance reviews are being explained before my eyes. Go ahead.
Well, and I should say, by the way, Laszlo is, I think, the pioneer inside the company of decide things with data. And we talk a lot, again, in our book, which none of you have actually bought yet, but I hope you'll buy it very soon. We talk a lot about how one of the ways to solve a lot of the typical problems you have in management is start with data. So Laszlo is literally the poster child of this. He walks and he says, here are the facts. And an interesting conversation always ensues when you start with that. Yes, ma'am.
So Google recently released its diversity numbers, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about how that decision came about and why now.
We have well, there's a tension in the company, in all companies, between what are secrets and what are embarrassing facts and what are leadership moves. And for years, Larry and Sergey and myself, Laszlo and so forth, felt that it's better to be more out front because people are watching us. So if you make a mistake, the best thing to do is to admit it. Now, the first problem you have is you have a lawyer who tells you you can't. But every aspect of business history, crisis, and so forth says, if you start and say, in a legally non-binding way, right, we screwed up here, everybody calms down. And the worst possible thing you can do is a cover-up or people well-meaning, misleading the information. Say, oh, our situation with women is not as bad as you think. And then we release the numbers, and like now we look like we're a cover-up, even though this person was just clueless. So we've got a problem. We have a problem that in the engineering fields, especially computer science, female participation is either level or declining depending on what metrics you use. That problem has been known for a long time. When I was studying this 15 years ago, the percentage of women in computer science was 18%-ish. It's now fallen to 12, 13%, and so forth. There may be a recent revival, which I call the Mark Zuckerberg effect of people in freshman year. There are many, many solutions to this. The best one, and the one I think that Google has talked about, and I've personally talked about funding, is to try to get every student in college to take a data analytics course. And data analytics means enough programming to understand how a computer works and enough data science to be able to figure out what the data says at sort of a freshman college level. And I think that would help. And this belies the success that women have had in other scientific fields. The majority of the PhDs in biology are being given to women now, and they're fantastic. So there's something about the computer science program and the way we're behaving that's causing the wrong outcome.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, I clearly agree with literally everything that everybody has said here today. And I spend, thank you. And I spend most of my time trying to fix the way that government works, that all of this stuff actually works in government. But I hear a comment that you made a few seconds ago and think, maybe it's hopeless, right? And I'm an optimist, so I sort of rebel against that thought.
All progress depends on unreasonable man or woman. I mean, you have to actually have an unreasonable attitude in order to really make progress against these tough things.
That's a fair point. The question is how, part of it, I think, is the way the public reacts to government. Part of it is how the media reacts to government. Part of the problem is how politics exists and how those kinds of conversations happen. Do you have any thoughts about how we can change that conversation?
So I've spent many years now working on this, and I have lots of opinions. The current political system in the West is largely a problem of misalignment of incentives. So if you are a government executive, what incentive do you have to release any information publicly or to take any risks? Because any information you release, you'll be criticized. Any risk you take, you might fail. So from your perspective, your incentives are to do exactly what you're told, never take any risks, and don't provide any leadership. Now, I'm obviously oversimplifying it. Now, the people I know in government went to government precisely to lead. So you have a misalignment between their incentives and their intent. What I like to do is think about what's a point where what's a leverage point? And I do think that basically trying to understand where the money is spent is an opportunity to do that. And governments are always thin on money because the money's always been allocated. So figure out a way where there's a source of new money and use that to drive the incentives that you really care about. And because government will drive to whatever those incentives are financially. Literally new programs and so forth.
I think I saw one hand go up somewhere back there.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
So it's clear to me, and I think too, probably, thank you, most people in this country or world have a lot of respect for the company you've built. So that goes without saying. I'm curious, with all your success, what is it that keeps you awake at night?
Well, I think in general, the seeds of the destruction of a large, successful company are inside of it. And when I look at my career and the things where I've been close to, you could see it. People knew it, and the leadership didn't act. Right? So that's my number one worry. My second worry is very specific. Google today is an enormous part of the internet in a good way. I'll do a small introduction of you should use Chrome, right? It's free, safer, faster, and so forth. You should use Gmail, on and on and on. I can go on and on. Android, obviously, 1.5 billion platforms. None of these were foreseen by any of us a decade ago. That's how successful they are. To me, the question is what happens one level higher? And I worry about this a lot, right? That Google will end up being a key part of the infrastructure. But think about your employees today. What are they doing? They run some painful Microsoft-based system that the MIS people forced them on 10 years ago. And then aside from that, they use Facebook and Instagram. They're texting each other and so forth. What does that look like over a 5-year period? Framing it into the 5-year question. Who are the winners? How will people interact? We know the answer is going to be smartphones, and we know the majority of those are going to be Android-based. So we're in good shape there. But what do the apps look like? How do they interact? How does the security work? Think about it in corporations and government. I mean, these are really hard questions, and I worry a lot about that.
Any final question from the group? There's a gentleman has a hand up in the back.
So the sociologist Erving Goffman, I think, popularized the term total institution for an institution in which people not only work, but also eat, also socialize.
What was the term again?
Total institution.
Total institution, like
Meaning
a mental,
that it's a
like a
total
mental
life.
institution.
Yes. And he gave us examples of this at one end, the university, and at the other end, the insane asylum. Right, and so we can
Okay,
think.
we're trying to figure out which part of that we're on.
Exactly, right. And so I guess the notion is, we've heard a lot about work, and it seems like increasingly the model that you've pursued so successfully is the total institution. So is this the workplace of tomorrow where, Googleites sort of eat here, they, pursue their hobbies here, they socialize here, they work here, obviously. Is that a good thing? Or are there limits that we should be wanting to impose on that?
Well, I'm not sure I wish limits to be imposed by someone else. I think there are some natural limits to this. It's easy to think that Google is about the benefits. Sorry, Laszlo. But what Google is really about is about empowerment with smart teams. I can assure you that if we eliminated all the perks, which we're not going to do, but imagine if we did, the employees would grumble a lot in an entitled way, as we discussed, and then they would get back to work because their friends are here, the people they collaborate, the projects that they care about. So to me, the test of an organization is whether the work is meaningful. And by meaningful, I mean in the kind that you understand meaningful to you is. I enjoy it, I get up. Right, I love to come to work. I love to be part of Google. It is my home. I'm asked all the time, what would I do next? I say, Google is my home. And I actually mean that. And I don't mean I live here because we banned that a while ago. But you get the idea. So I would encourage you not to think of it as a sort of a total institution model, but rather as a very specific way in which one can conduct one's adult life. So in that structure, it's a little bit like a graduate school. And I was in graduate school, you were as well. And what happens in graduate school? You're with the same people, you're working on the same things, you're there, breakfast through dinner. You have this enormous sense that you have a discovery, an impact, and so forth. That's very empowering. And I think it's very sad when I meet people who've spent 20 or 30 years in organizations and jobs where they don't have that sense of individual empowerment as defined by them, right? That they're doing it because their parents told them or because they decided to be a lawyer and now they think it's boring and they just don't like what they're doing. That's a life lost. And I'm old enough now to see friends of mine actually die, not to be on a downer here. And these things actually end. And so your time is limited, so choose it wisely. Again, in a plug for our book, we talk a lot about how do you run a culture where people actually feel empowered. And we're not perfect, we make mistakes and so forth. But it can be done. And I would argue that each and every one of you has a sort of a business responsibility to do this, because I think it produces more productivity, which is good for the shareholders. But it's also sort of the right moral thing to do. Right? Having people more empowered is just a good way to live one's life.
Well, and as my second favorite journalist on the planet, Jon Stewart. Oh, you need to get to the city.
No, I'm fine.
Wow.
My talk is in Santa Clara. So yes,
Nice.
I'll shout.
Oh, it's right behind you.
I
There you go.
understand when Laszlo joined, there wasn't a people group per se, or you made the decision to invest in this area. I started a startup. We have 100 people, Indiegogo, and making a decision to hire a VP of people now, trying to address a lot of this.
Well, you can't have him.
This is not.
I'm just going to stand between the two of you and prevent any further communication.
We'll see about that now. I'm fearless. Now, what was your thinking process? When did you know that you needed energy investment in this area? And what were the triggers, or what was the data that showed you that? Or how did you know it was time? Because I'm afraid we're maybe too early, I don't know, but
I think
it's just a hunch, and I don't like to make decisions on pure hunches.
first place, that's the right answer. And if you want to lead, and you want to lead with people, you better have a pretty good answer how you're going to manage them. And the company's run by computer scientists, right, scientists and so forth. So anything we do in HR is going to be very data analytics driven. And there was no finer choice than Laszlo at the time. His Hungarian background, notwithstanding, and the fact that he worked at General Electric, and basically there was just a bunch of obnoxious things that we had to overcome, but we hired the right person anyway. But so my advice would be, for a small company, try to find somebody who looks at the world analytically in a measurement context and cares about innovation. And you can find these people in HR, in finance, right, in security, in those things. And nobody believes that, but I'll tell you, they exist, and they're such a delight to work with because they're just smarter, right? They're just more interesting. They have more problems. They're just all sorts of challenges, right? So to the degree that this goes back to this hiring bias, you want to hire people who will make you a little bit uncomfortable, but in a respectful way. They're going to push you, right? What about this? What about this? What about that? Right? That'll produce a better organization. And what happened over the years was that I had these various ideas, and Laszlo would say, well, let me see if it's true or not. And I never liked it when he disproved me, right? But the problem was I could never argue against his data. And I'll tell you, by the way, just to go on just a little bit more about our model. So we have board meetings, and we have board members, and the board members say that they've never seen in a corporation the amount of analytics that we do about people presented to the board, right? That's how we run Google, and you can do it too, at any scale.
I'll just add that the first HR person we hired, Stacy Sullivan, was, I think, employee 51, 52, something like that. She's still with us today. She's here today and is amazing. And has been sort of the heart and soul. And
she was interesting because she had both the analytical capability and also sort of the emotional component that you associate with HR. And so what happened with Stacy was we had all these various young company problems, like person A hates person B, and we need them both. And she had this unusual ability to go in and talk to both and resolve it. So again, I don't want to overweight analytics. You clearly have to have EQ, but you need to have an analytical basis as well.
Other questions?
I think it's time for everyone to have dinner.
Okay, well, as I was going to say, my second favorite journalist, Jon Stewart, would say, the book is How Google Works. It's on bookshelves everywhere. But Eric, really, thanks for taking time to surprise us.
Thank you. Thank you.